All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the largest financial fraud in history. We'll be navigating all the way from the cold, hard mechanics of a massive crime right down to its deeply unresolved human cost.
Let's just jump right in with a number that is, frankly, mind-boggling. $64.8 billion. To put that into perspective, we're talking about roughly the GDP of a small country, and all of that was contained within just 4,800 client accounts back in 2008. So how does a number that impossibly huge just vanish into thin air?
Well, we're going to look at this whole thing like an iceberg. First, we'll stay above the surface, breaking down the Wall Street legend, his impossible strategy, the glaring red flags, and the eventual collapse of his house of cards. Then, we're taking a deep dive below the surface to witness the devastating real-world collateral damage.
Let's kick things off with the man himself, the Wall Street legend.
You know, to really grasp why people trusted Bernie Madoff with their life savings, you have to look at his origin story. He wasn't some shadowy outsider. He legitimately founded his firm back in 1960 with just $5,000 he saved up from lifeguarding. Over the decades, he became an absolute Wall Street titan. He literally helped develop the technology that became the NASDAQ and eventually even served as its chairman.
And he brilliantly leveraged all that industry prestige by framing his firm as a tight-knit family business. He brought in his brother Peter as senior managing director, his niece Shauna was the compliance attorney, and his two sons, Mark and Andrew, worked in the completely legitimate trading wing. To the outside world, this looked like the absolute gold standard of stability.
Which brings us to his impossible strategy and the incredible illusion of safety he sold to the world. Okay, so how did he turn that stellar reputation into billions of dollars? Well, if you strip away all the fancy Wall Street jargon, the truth is actually kind of shocking in its simplicity. He was running a classic primitive Ponzi scheme. There was no secret trading edge. He was literally just paying off his existing investors with the fresh capital he collected from new ones.
But of course, he couldn't just say that. He hid this basic fraud behind a massive smokescreen of extreme sophistication. When clients asked how he made such consistent returns, he claimed to use this highly exclusive split-strike conversion strategy. Supposedly, he was buying blue-chip stocks and taking out options contracts to cushion against market volatility. It was complex, it was confusing, and honestly, it was just plausible enough coming from a former NASDAQ chairman.
And the real hook here was safety. I mean, look at late 2008. The broader market is in absolute freefall. The S&P 500 is down 38%, yet Madoff is miraculously reporting 5.6% gains to his clients. He was offering a life raft in a terrifying financial climate, and people were more than happy to hand over their cash to get on board.
But surely someone noticed, right? Let's talk about the ignored red flags.
You've got to be wondering how financial regulators completely missed this for years. And the crazy part is, the warning sirens were blaring. The SEC missed an astonishing volume of opportunities spanning well over a decade. They probed a feeder fund in '92, investigated him for front-running in '99, and by 2000, outside analysts were practically begging the SEC to take a closer look.
Take Harry Markopolos, for example. Back in 2005, he handed the SEC a devastating 17-page memo. He provided clear, hard, mathematical proof of the fraud. He showed that Madoff's 45-degree angle of steady, nonstop returns simply didn't exist in finance unless you were illegally front-running or running a Ponzi scheme. Markopolos famously compared it to a baseball player batting over .900 for an entire season without anyone suspecting them of cheating. And if that level of incompetence wasn't enough, things were incredibly cozy behind the scenes. SEC compliance officer Eric Swanson, who was literally part of the team reviewing Madoff's firm, ended up marrying Madoff's niece, Shanna Madoff. Remember her? The firm's compliance attorney? Regulatory oversight was just deeply, deeply compromised by these blatant conflicts of interest.
So, what actually brings down a massive house of cards like this?
Spoiler alert, it wasn't the regulators who caught Madoff, it was the global economy. The 2008 financial crisis triggered a catastrophic domino effect. After Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers collapsed, panicked investors flooded Madoff's firm with $7 billion in redemption requests. But because it was a Ponzi scheme, the money just wasn't there. His Chase bank account, which he used to juggle all these funds, ran entirely dry, plummeting to just $234 million. He simply couldn't fake the math anymore.
Now we're shifting gears. We're going below the surface to look at the real cost of this infamy, the collateral damage. On December 10, 2008, Bernie Madoff called his two sons, Mark and Andrew, into his apartment.
He dropped the whole Wall Street facade, stripped away the fake math, and confessed that the entire asset management arm was, quote, one big lie. And with those 3 little words, he plunged his own family into an inescapable nightmare. Mark and Andrew didn't hesitate. They immediately turned their father in to the authorities. But here's the absolute tragedy of it all. Their complete innocence regarding the legitimate trading arm couldn't save them. They were crushed under the heavy weight of inherited infamy, facing a fierce, totally indiscriminate public outrage. Mark, the older brother, ended up absorbing this tidal wave of public hatred. Friends described him as living like someone bracing for a physical impact that just never ended. Eventually, he buckled under a burden he simply could no longer carry. He committed suicide exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest, a tragically symbolic end.
Andrew, the younger brother, fought incredibly hard to rebuild his life and somehow step out of his father's toxic shadow. He had actually been treated for mantle cell lymphoma years prior, but following the scandal, that cancer returned. Andrew publicly stated that the long-term severe stress of the public hatred had weakened his body and brought the illness back. The lingering aftershocks of his father's crime ultimately devastated his health, and he passed away in 2014 at just 48 years old.
Their mother, Ruth Madoff, later described this entire aftermath as a daily recalibration just to survive. And I think that's a crucial takeaway for us. Financial crimes are never just abstract system failures or red numbers on a spreadsheet. Reputational harm absolutely permeates relationships and health, delivering devastating consequences that are wildly disproportionate to a person's actual involvement.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. Long after the headlines fade away, the perpetrators are locked up, and the billions of dollars are written off, how do we reckon with a punishment that permanently breaks the lives of the innocent? How do we measure justice when it bleeds so profoundly into the lives of those whose only crime was the last name? Something to think about.